Okay, hi everyone. For a third time, I'm with Dominik Kirst. I'm Cody Rue. This is the Church of Logic, and we're going to finally talk about the proof of the incompleteness theorem, try to give you an idea of how this thing could possibly be true, and hopefully this will give you intuition about what the theorem actually says and what its consequences are. So the ingredients of the proof, we already kind of have them. I talked a fair amount about Turing machines, and I talked about how Turing machines could simulate other Turing machines and stuff like that. And those are the main ingredients of the proof. They aren't the historical ingredients. Gödel gave a somewhat different proof. It uses some of the same philosophy because, that's how people think about the theorem. But at the time, he didn't even know about Turing machines. Turing came up with his ideas, I want to say, almost 3 years after the theorem. Dominik, do you happen to remember the timeline?
6 years?
6 years?
I think Incompleteness, was first published 30 or 31. I think Gödel found it out when he tried to extend his completeness result to second order logic after doing his PhD. And then it was until 36 when Church and Turing found out about this computability interpreted.
Right. Okay.
So 5.
Yeah. I actually looked the Turing thing up. He had written his paper in 35. So if Gödel had the crucial idea in 31, that would be 4 years apart. But yeah, I explained this in the other one as well. Confluence of ideas. Everybody was having almost all the same ideas at almost all the same time. I guess today things would happen even faster with internet and email and I don't know, forums. But yeah, okay. So we're going to explain the Turing proof because it makes more sense, and I've explained kind of the main components. So why don't Dominik, who was not at the other episodes but knows kind of all about this, assume that people know what a Turing machine is and the fact that a Turing machine can take another Turing machine as input and simulate it. Can you give us a proof of the incompleteness theorem?
Sure, I can try that. You have not said that you have discussed the halting problem already. So this
I have. Though. But okay, but let's not assume everybody knows this by heart.
Okay, I recap from there. So if you have this universal Turing machine that takes a Turing machine as input and does stuff with that, you can kind of develop the idea whether you can devise a Turing machine that takes a Turing machine as input and says yes or no, depending on whether this Turing machine would terminate or not, the one that you got as input. And then by a very simple logical argument that is called diagonalization, you can show that no such Turing machine exists, which means that the halting problem is undecidable. That's how it's often called. You can't find a decision procedure that decides whether a given Turing machine does terminate or not. That's the whole basis you need. And this is the one that got, as Cody said, just observed a bit later. So this tool wasn't available to Gödel, so he had to do another proof strategy. But if you have that, then the step to incompleteness is actually pretty small, because what we said, the 3 ingredients, and we can now formulate them very precisely again. You have an enumerable proof system. So there is a Turing machine that spits out one proof after the other. Then you are expressive enough, which for now can just mean that if a Turing machine terminates, then the system recognizes that. And then it should be sound, which can just mean the opposite right now. So if the system thinks a Turing machine would terminate, then it actually terminated. If we have these 3 ingredients, and now also assume that the system on top of this would be complete, then we can actually find an algorithm that decides the halting problem. That's the whole strategy of the argument. And how would
Can you just remind us what completeness means? I've explained what the incompleteness theorem is, quote unquote, but I haven't really defined completeness per se, or I have in passing.
Okay, so here completeness now would mean that every formula you can state in the logical system is either provable or refutable. So the negation of the formula would be provable. And now we want to show incompleteness, and this is a weaker form now than constructing an exact formula that is neither provable nor refutable. We just say that assuming that the system were complete, from this we can derive a contradiction. And the contradiction we derive is the statement that the halting problem is decidable. And to derive that, what we have to do is, well, we have to find this algorithm that actually decides. And the algorithm is pretty simple, because what it does is it enumerates all the proofs. And why can we do that? That's exactly the criterion 1 we have, that proofs should be enumerable. But now, using completeness, we know that given a Turing machine, the statement that this Turing machine terminates is either provable or it is refutable. So it is nothing in between. So we just have to wait for this algorithm at some point to spit out either the proof that the Turing machine had terminated or that it did not terminate. And then, in the case where the system thinks that the Turing machine had terminated, we use the third criterion, soundness, and know that we can then decide that actually also in the external, where we construct this decision procedure, the Turing machine was terminating. And in the other case, where we find that the system thinks it does not terminate, we use the second criterion to show that also it didn't terminate in the external.
Right.
And that's
if the system
so the whole,
says it doesn't terminate, then it actually doesn't terminate.
yes. So it's just by these two conditions we have in the about the expressibility and about soundness, we know that like the termination property externally is exactly the same as within the system. And then by completeness, we have just a guarantee that the stupid enumeration of just all proofs will give us a decision, because one of the two statements will be enumerated by just the fact this was the first criterion that we can enumerate proofs at all. And that's the whole argument.
Great. So yeah, so what we did was we take our system, and we know how to build these systems. We know how to build systems where you can enumerate proofs. We know how to build systems that we believe reasonably are consistent. And of course, we know how to build systems that are sufficiently expressive to talk about Turing machines. And we know how to build systems that we believe are correct when they say something doesn't halt. Now, we assume that we have this extra condition of completeness, which is to say, if a Turing machine halts or if it doesn't halt, eventually, you can prove it in this system. And now we've gotten a contradiction, which was we've built an algorithm that we know cannot exist, which is takes in a Turing machine, says whether it halts or whether it doesn't halt. Okay, so that contradiction means our last assumption of completeness must have been false, and therefore our system cannot possibly have been complete, right? There's a contradiction there because we built an object that can't possibly exist, this halting checker. And great. And so now, now that you've understood this proof, we've only used the ingredients that we've seen up to now, but you can see that this puts a real restriction on our logical systems, which is to say they better be confused sometimes about whether a Turing machine halts or it doesn't halt. In particular, a Turing machine might not halt, but the system might not know it. Any last words?
Yeah, I think just in fairness, it sounds like a magical trick, what we did here. But in the last episode, we emphasized this view on that you can form these concrete sentences, and you can even throw these sentences in, and you still have gaps in between. And here we didn't construct an actual gap. But the nice thing is that if you do the same proof just a bit more carefully, you even can derive from it statement, a concrete statement that you can formulate in the logical system that will be independent in the sense of incompleteness. So it is neither provable nor refutable. We didn't do that because explaining it is much easier if you just assume completeness and derive a contradiction, but you can do it a bit more carefully and even get the slightly stronger or somewhat extremely stronger result that gives you
a cool thing is that in the next episode or the one after that, we are actually, hopefully Dominik will be still with me or just me, explain the second incompleteness theorem. And it turns out that the second incompleteness theorem gives you a very concrete example of such a statement. And it's a very simple one. I don't want to spoil it too much, but we can definitely find such a statement. And you can either do it carefully through the process Dominik described by examining this proof we just gave, or you can just wait for the second incompleteness theorem, and that one gives it to you right out the gate, tells you, hey, this theorem, you can't prove it in that system. All right. That was great. Thank you so much.